The president's decision to go to war in Libya not only has brought on backlash from his base on the left, it's caused him to seek counsel from some of his harshest critics on the right, something I first reported here a couple of weeks ago. Last week, the president met with none other than Bill Kristol to measure his support for the president's decision to wage war in Libya. In an article entitled, "You've Come a Long Way, Baby," Mr. Kristol, a colleague of mine at Fox, declared that President Obama has, quote, entered the foreign policy mainstream. And later on Fox, Bill called the president, quote, a born-again neocon. Born-again neocon. Joining me now, my colleague and friend, Bill Kristol. Bill, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom.
Great to be here with you.
What did you mean when you called the president a born-again neocon? Explain that for our audience.
Well, first of all, I should say he was not really seeking my counsel. He was simply telling a bunch of columnists and commentators that he was going to give the speech that he ended up giving that night.
Jeez, I thought you invited him over for dinner and he came alone.
I can't really talk about that. That was the really secret meeting before the public meeting. You know, I just don't want to.
From that meeting, and I understand colleagues of yours were there.
Yeah.
What did you glean about his thinking?
I mean, as reflected in the speech he gave that night, that was the Monday night speech to the nation on Libya, I thought he had really embraced the notion that when we intervened, we had to intervene decisively, that we were going to intervene in a serious way. I'm a little worried, more than a little worried now, that having intervened, which I think was the right thing to do, I don't think you do, but that's fine, that's a difference of opinion, but having intervened, I'm now worried he's not doing it decisively. He intervened and then started backing us out almost as fast as he intervened, and we're now ended up, what seems, with an inconclusive stalemate, which I don't think is a good outcome.
But when you called him a born-again neocon, I guess you meant he had a sea change in his thinking.
Well, sure, if you look at the original Cairo speech, which was the landmark speech of his first year in the presidency, the problem with our standing in the world was that we hadn't been nice enough to people. We had to be more understanding. We had to be more reticent in using our force. And then suddenly, not suddenly, but over the last couple of years, he's increased our commitment in Afghanistan. He hasn't pulled out too quickly from Iraq, and now he's intervened in another country, in Libya.
Shouldn't he have consulted the Congress like George Bush did, rather than wait for them to be on spring break and him to be in Brazil before he sent our troops into Libya?
I think he should have at least consulted the Congress much more. Perhaps he should have gotten an authorization from Congress. I support Senator Marco Rubio, who said, let's authorize this in Congress. Let's have a healthy debate in Congress. And
surely if there had been a declaration of war, then my argument that the president can't make war on his own fails, because the Congress would have validly and constitutionally declared war on Libya with a goal, rather than a little bombing here, a little bombing there, and pulling out when we're tired, for which you criticize him.
Right. I mean, Marco Rubio's proposal for an authorization of the use of force, which I think is a sort of substitute for a declaration of war, has been in the last few decades, does say, and the goal should be regime change in Libya. We shouldn't intervene and end up with a stalemate.
And how would we decide what countries to invade? I mean, we didn't invade Egypt. We're not invading Syria, where people are being killed in the streets. We've only sort of soft invaded Libya. What kind of a foreign policy is this?
Foreign policy is full of difficult judgments, Judge, and as you know from having been a judge, you can't have one size fits all. Obviously, this was a case where I think there really was a case for going in, a dictator who was isolated, who had American blood on his hands, genuine broad popular uprising against him, and I think it was doable, and is doable, actually, without great risk to us, without a commitment of ground troops and the like. So,
suppose the people that we support and embrace and replace him are worse than he himself, because we don't know who they are, according to Secretary Clinton.
I think we know who some of them are. I think it's very unlikely they'll be worse than Muammar Gaddafi, and one way we can try to make sure they're not worse is by being there and working with them, not just staying away.
What is it about the White House, from your years having worked with Vice President Quayle and covered the White House, that the world looks so different looking out than it does looking in? I mean, here you have a president who blasted the concept of self-willed war by a president when he was a senator. Here you have a president who, when he was a senator, said, I'm not going to vote to raise the debt ceiling because this money's being wasted and debt is a serious problem. Now he's 180 degrees from that.
I guess from one point of view, you could say you're in the White House, you get more responsible. You don't, if the debt ceiling has to be raised, you don't demagogue it. And if you have to intervene abroad, you don't demagogue that either. From another point of view, you might say people get co-opted or suckered in by the establishment once they're in the White House and they lose their principles. So it sort of depends on your point of view. But I think your basic premise is right. People change when they become president, for better or worse.
How could we trust this president if he does 180 degrees on something as profound as the debt and something as profound as war?
Well, the debt was not that was just a political vote, and I don't think people voted for him in 2008 thinking this guy will never raise the debt limit. But the debt limit is an interesting argument coming up, I think, and I myself had first thought Ultimately, they've got to raise it, so it won't be such a big deal. I now think, actually, it is a big deal. I think they need to make fundamental changes to persuade congressmen to vote to raise it, changes in the budget process, hard spending caps, and I think they should add part of Paul Ryan's budget now to the debt limit.
And I think that if they can't get those changes, they shouldn't vote to raise the debt limit and let the president run the government on the basis of the money he collects. Another debate for another time.
Okay.
Glad you're here. Thank you, Bill. Freedom Watch gets hundreds of emails every day, but nothing like this one. A call for help from an American soldier in Iraq. Not from the terrorists, but from the United States government. I'll read it to you next.